Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. My name is Sergei Sputnikov, and I was born in the USSR. In today's video, I will continue my review of one of the most amazing books about Soviet Union. It's called Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside the Soviet Union, by Black American engineer Robert Robinson. I receive a lot of comments about my channel that people like it because a lot of it is a first-hand account of life in the Soviet Union, but I spent only 20 years in the USSR and kind of to the end of it, right from 1971 to 1991. Meanwhile, Robert Robertson came to the Soviet Union in 1930 and spent 44 years in the USSR, so he experienced Stalin era, Khrushchev era, a little bit of Brezhnev era. So this guy, this is like a must-have. It's a Bible for anyone who want to learn more about life in the Soviet Union through the eyes of American. By the way, I have a separate playlist dedicated to this book, Black on Red. It's already have 9 videos there. There'll be video number 10. So if you're interested, I'll post the link below this video in the comment section. Just a quick refresher before we begin. Robert Robinson was born in 1906 in Jamaica. So I said he is a Black American. He got a degree as engineer toolmaker in Havana, Cuba, moved to Detroit, and in 1930 he was invited to go to the Soviet Russia, where they offered him a lot of money and great career opportunities. Okay, so we jump to chapter number 20, page 225. This is in early 1947, 2 years after the end of the Great Patriotic War. And just a quick side note, what I remember from the history lessons back in the Soviet school, Soviet Union had Great Patriotic War, which started on June 22nd, 1941, when Germany attacked the USSR. Then the Great Patriotic War was over on May 9, 1945, and only after that, Soviet Union participated for a very short time in the World War II, when it helped its allies, United States primarily, to win against Japan. So this is what I remember from the Soviet lessons of history. The World War II for the Soviet Union was very short, only summer of 1945. We had nothing to do with 1939 and attack of Poland. Alright, so back to the book. By early 1947, the Kremlin's campaign to discredit the United States, its wartime ally, in the eyes of the Soviet citizens, was in full force. The theater, cinema, and radio were useful media for anti-American message. And it was always a mystery for me because I loved history, but I couldn't understand, seeing only the Soviet side of the story, why Soviet Union and United States just fell apart almost instantly after the victory over Nazi Germany. It's like yesterday we were friends and today we're enemies. And this is example. I mean, it's not 1945, but it's actually campaign to discredit the United States going on now in Soviet Union. We were friends. We enjoyed Roosevelt's balls. If you watch that video, when we got American powdered eggs, which were called Roosevelt balls, and suddenly America is the worst enemy ever. Okay, so back to Mr. Robertson. Ever since my arrival in 1930, so he is already in the Soviet Union for 17 years, I had seen and experienced how the Soviet authorities made effective propaganda out of American history of racial inequality. After all, the reasoning went, America was a bourgeois country where the rich white capitalists crushed the poor black proletarian underclass, a vivid example and a useful reminder of overall failure of capitalist economics and so-called democracy. The American play Deep Are The Roots was ideal for Kremlin propaganda purposes, so the state-controlled theaters were ordered to perform it in Moscow and throughout the country. The play was successful in meeting with Kremlin's propaganda objectives. Russian audiences became incensed over the portrait of the life of blacks in the American South, who were portrayed as subservient, groveling, serf-like people. By the way, I'm very curious how many of you guys are familiar with this 1946 Broadway play, Deep Are The Roots? Please post in your comments. Thank you. Many Russians wondered how Americans could tolerate such a racism after fighting the Nazis with their philosophy of Aryan superiority and their efforts to eliminate the Jews. Unfortunately, the Russian feeling of moral indignation toward the United States covered over their own deep-rooted racial and ethnic prejudice. And Mr. Robinson knows what he's talking about. In one of my previous videos, I told you the part when he was sick and a doctor told him that you need to move south, otherwise you will never be able to chase zebras again. So this is how the Russian everyday racism, you see a black person, you assume automatically that what you like to do the best in your life is chase zebras. Here comes the good part. So behind the scenes of the Russian production of Deep Are The Roots lay a tale of Russian racial prejudice. Brett, a black boy, a leading character in the play, was reared as the young boy alongside two small white girls of a well-to-do family in the South, where his mother had served as the family's cook. After he returned from the fighting the Nazis in the war, Brett was welcomed home warmly by one of now grown-up white women. The resulting conflict set the stage for the rest of the play. Here it goes. White Russian actors with their faces, necks, and hands painted with soot were bad enough in some of the minor roles. As they perspired, the soot wore off their white skin and they ended up looking more like Dalmatians than anything else. But it was far worse to have a white actor playing the leading role, especially since a very qualified black American actor in Moscow named Waylon Rudd, whom I knew, had sought the leading role. Although Rudd tried several times to get the part of Brett in the play, he was never even allowed an audition. The comments of an American theater producer who was invited to attend the performance of the play in Moscow were printed in one of the Moscow's English-language newspapers. After the performance, he asked, "Was it not possible to have a black actor perform the part of Brett?" The enthusiast interpreter answered him, "We would love to have, but you must remember there are no black artists in our country." In Soviet Russia, there is no racism. We just don't let black actors to play black characters in Soviet production of Deep Are The Roots. And then they said that shortly after Deep Are The Roots played in Moscow theaters and was broadcast over the radio, Kremlin decided to make a film based on the life of Miklucha Maklai. So it's 19th century Russian anthropologist. So he traveled to New Guinea and to study Papuans. I think I'm saying right. So there were scenes with black Americans in the film, and the producer said he needed black people to play those roles. So this is how Robert Robinson actually got an offer, and he refused in the beginning, but they offered him some money and he couldn't refuse. He said it called for 3 to 4 months stint in Odessa movie studio, so that's a port on the Black Sea, for which I would be paid 10,000 rubles. Not bad, I thought. It was a lot more than I was making at ball bearing plant as an engineer. So once again, even in Soviet Russia, a movie star makes way more money than an engineer. So after arriving to Odessa, he said, I arrived to work the following morning at 8 a.m. sharp as scheduled. Also reporting to the studio were 6 other blacks recruited for the film, including Waylon Rudd. One of the other 6 black actors was an American, and the remaining 3 were born in Russia, in the Caucasian mountains. So now that's another thing to research. I never heard of it. So Robert says, I had known from relatives that were native-born blacks in the Soviet Union, but neither the media nor any Russian magazines or books I had come across ever mentioned them. Blacks have lived in the Caucasian mountains since the mid-1700s, when they were brought out of Africa to Russia by Catherine the Great. I do not know of any foreigners ever being allowed to visit the colony of blacks living in the heart of Caucasian mountains. There's another interesting topic to research. A colony of blacks living in the hearts of Caucasian mountains. So let's see how the Roberts experience as an actor went down. It went downhill really fast. When we began 2 days later, my illusion of life of a film actor were quickly shattered. I was expecting to have to memorize a script and deliver lines. That did not happen with any of us. We were all told what to say and how to say it, moment by moment on the spot. For the most part, all we did was emulate the director. The white actors, all professionals, followed the same routine, trying to do as the director showed them and told them to. And here's the real kicker. The situation with the 3 black Americans was really grotesque. Here was a white Russian film director telling 3 black Americans how blacks in the American South were supposed to act. Every scene, large or small, had to be done over and over again. When we did not do what the director felt was right, he would curse. It was not that he was swearing us, it was more as he was denouncing his fate. The only one who caught his wrath regularly was his wife, whose job it was to run his errands. He would usually call out to her by saying, "Hey, stupid lazy woman, go get such and such." He never dared answer him, but bowed her head, obviously humiliated, and carried out his commands. Well, I definitely need to do some search and find out maybe this movie about Miklucha Maklai definitely was done and came out back in 1930. Maybe it's even available on YouTube. If I find anything, I'll post in the comment section below this video. Okay, my friends, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, this is an amazing book. I definitely recommend it, and I got more to go through. I made notes as I went through this book. There's quite a lot of things to talk about. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Sergei wrote a book based on diaries he made when he was first in the United States. And as I understand, this is just volume 1, right? That's correct. He's going to have multiple volumes coming out. Well, I said, well, since Sergei is kind enough to come up and speak with us, I bought the book. I said, I might as well read this. I read this in one sitting. 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I just couldn't put it down. It was so fascinating because your writing is very compelling, for one, and his story is very interesting, for two. It's really interesting. You know, we've lived here our whole lives. We don't have that perspective. It's just so interesting to hear someone else's perspective about what we take for granted. So I hope you really tune in and listen to what he has to say. It's a very interesting, very informed perspective. Sergei is not a historian. He's an electrical engineer by trade, but I find that he has a depth of understanding on history, economics, culture. So just a very observant fellow and a great storyteller. So